I'm back to troubleshooting the second tandem chassis. If you recall, it more or less works, but it has a long warm-up time. When I first turn it on, the horizontal hold is impossible to get, even if I adjust the controls. But as the set warms up, it gets better and better, and finally, after about 2-3 minutes, it's pretty solid. So I just fired it up. I was also asked if the boost voltage looked okay, so that's what I'm checking now. It should be 420 volts, or 410 volts. That's this. And I'm only at 310. See, there's a horizontal hold. It's terrible. So I got a few thoughts about this. One, B plus in general is low on this set, which had me concerned at first, but it's also low in my first tandem set, which is working fine. Similarly, the current draw on this is only about 1.2 amps, and it should be over 1.5 if the 180 watt rating is correct on the back of the cabinet, and if you trust the same service info, it says it should be about 1.65 amps. Anyways, so some thoughts I've got. One, the original thermistor down in there, it should be 400 ohms cold, and that measures over 600. And although the steady state current on the tube filament seems to measure okay, I think that's contributing somewhat to the long warm-up time. The sync is getting gradually better and better, and eventually this will lock in. Another thing I left in there that's original is this cap. I measured it and it seemed to be okay, except for one of the sections. There's 3 caps in there. One of the caps, 200 microfarads at low voltage, and I just don't have any meters that can test it properly. My vintage capacitor tester doesn't measure that high in capacitance or that low voltage. And it turns out that this meter, this meter, although it can measure capacitance, it won't do up to 200 microfarads. So I just tacked in a replacement, and that did seem to help the vertical linearity, because that cap is cathode bypass on the vertical output tube. That's a really, really common problem in old TVs. Whenever you got vertical height or linearity issues, check that cathode bypass cap. Now, the other 2 sections I haven't replaced. One is the filter cap on that boost. Now, although my tester showed it didn't have excessive leakage, if it does, it would pull this voltage down. The other cap is this guy. It's the filter cap on the 115 volt source. Now, if you look at the horizontal circuits, they aren't feeding off that 115 volt source. They're powered off 250 volt source. There's a horizontal hold and range and frequency. So those are the 3 things I've been fiddling around with. Is that coil, the range, and the hold. And then here's the horizontal AFC circuit. So, horizontal AFC circuit has got a cut plate, or K network, whatever you want to call them. And so does this. And the oscillator circuit. That's this guy, and I believe this guy. Now, I used somewhat different capacitors on this set than I had on my Holiday or on my other tandem set. In those, I used more mica caps and some plastic film caps, whereas in this set, I used almost all ceramic. But I did double check the capacitance on each one before I put them in, and I used C0G, which are the most temperature stable type of ceramic cap. But let's see if the temperature matters. So I got a can of compressed air. If you hold these upside down and shoot some out, it's very cold. So this is this network, which is in the oscillator circuit. So hit that. Little bit of bending, a little bit of effect, but it snaps back really quick. not so much that time. So that is definitely something worth checking. However, not so easy to check because of the nature of these sets. Can't really get it out. Now, I do have the original, and I got the original from one or two other chassis too, so assuming I could get at it, I could replace this. It's interesting, just for me touching it, the picture is wiggling a little bit horizontally. In fact, it's doing it quite a bit as I put my finger over in this area. Huh. Check that out. It's just for me doing this. So I'm bringing my hand over here. So, I think that's the culprit. Touching the coil doesn't have any effect. Huh, but touching the tube does. Interesting. I wonder if I'm changing the inter-electrode capacitance by doing that. Or is the tube just dirty in its socket? No. Weird. I've never seen something be that sensitive before. Oh, something else I want to try is adjusting this, the buzz control. Ooh. Well, that certainly made things worse. Well, seems like where it was pretty much the best position. Alright, so to recap, there's something very, very touchy in this area. I've tried swapping out this tube a few times. I can swap it out a few more. Otherwise, I'm suspecting this. It's weird. It's actually the tube is what's touchy. It's not this network, I don't think. It's this tube. Which is crazy. Try to just hit the tube with freeze spray. I gotta be a little careful when you do this because these tubes get pretty toasty, like the audio output. And if I was to do it with cold spray, I could very well see that cracking. Hard to get the tube and not anything else. Yeah. It did, and then it came back. Not really that time, though. Strange. Now, there is a procedure, too, for adjusting this coil, which I should also go through. And I was surprised to see that you actually short the coil out when you adjust it. Although, that kind of rings a bell. Ages ago, when I first started running these Predicta sets, I remember somebody saying that when you adjust the circuit, you actually short that coil out. So they did their, let's see what the instructions are. Here we go. Alright, so you put a clip across that coil. You set the horizontal hole to the center of its range, and then you adjust the horizontal range control, and then you remove the clip and adjust the frequency slug until it synchronizes. So I can give that a try. Luckily, in parallel with that coil is that cap, and I got plenty of exposed lead length on that, so it should be a fairly easy thing to do. And finally, one other thing I've noticed is this flyback's making a bit of noise, and occasionally I hear a little crackling, catch a little whiff of ozone. So I think at some point I need to get in there like I did with the other flyback and recoat that. I just swapped out this tube with one from another set that's working fine. So I'm curious to see what happens. One, I just had the set powered up, so all the other tubes are warm, and that one's going to be cold, so it's going to take a little while longer to warm up, I expect. And curious to see if it's as sensitive if I bring my hand near it. Got the meter on the boost voltage again. Alright, so it kicks in and holds all over the place. So I can adjust the horizontal hole and get it to lock, but as the set warms up, it just keeps drifting off again and again and again. So swapping out the tubes apparently hasn't accomplished anything. Oh yeah, it's just as sensitive with this tube too. I think I can actually get the hold of the lock if I put my hand on the tube. If I take it away, we lose it. I just pulled out the first tandem chassis I restored. It seems to work a lot better. And here's the boost on that. A little low, but 380 is a lot more than 300 we got with the other set. And let's see if this tube is sensitive as well. Huh, look at that. Rock solid. No change whatsoever when I bring my hand near it. Weird. So, what could be the cause of that? Well, one, if something's not connected right. So I think I'm really going to have to pull that board out and make sure that all the solder connections are good. Could be a broken pin in the base, could be a dirty contact, could be a bad solder joint below, and then, of course, there's this network. And I'm just checking where the slug sits on this set. It's right about level with the plastic. So, it's nice to have two chassis to compare side by side, that's for sure. I've been going through and doing some resistance checks using the chart from the Sam's PhotoFact. Here's that horizontal multi-vibrator tube, 6CG7. Well, I got to pin 2, should be 1.8 meg. Now these are resistances between that point and ground. So, got a little clip on ground, and here's my socket extender, makes these things easier to check. Get to pin 2, it's infinite. When I checked on this other chassis, I got exactly 1.8 meg, so something is not right. I think that 1.8 meg is inside that network. Let's see. Actually, it's inside this network. Kind of annoying to have the page break right there. Well, there's pin 2. So pin 2 has a 68k ohm resistor in series with a capacitor to ground. So that's going to measure open. So no path to ground there, but the other side goes over to pin 6 inside this network, which has a 1 meg resistor. And follow around, that connects to a 680, which connects to a 150 to ground. You add all those up, you get about 1.8 meg. So, something is not right with that K4 network, which I think is this guy. So, either I made a mistake when I fabricated it, or I screwed up when I soldered it in. Either way, I don't see any way around me having to pop this board back out. Actually, there's a little bit more I can do. I was checking out the other wiring in here, and it turns out that this point, this node here, is easily accessible because it goes to pin 7 on the 9BR7. So between ground, we got 150K, 680K, and then over to pin 7. So you add those up, it should be around close to 900 or 800. So, let's say pin 7, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and there. So that's okay. So these two resistors are okay. Now, if I can get at it, let's see. If I measure between pin 7 and pin 6, which is going to pin 2 over here, there should be 1 mega ohm between those two pins. And I don't. It measures infinite. It's open, which is kind of what I suspected. So one thing I could try doing, if I can somehow manage it, is to take a 1 mega ohm resistor and tack it between pins 2 and 7 on these sockets. I'm not quite sure how I might go. Well, actually I do have an idea how I could go about that. The way they make these tube sockets is the tubes go on these, the pins of the tube go to these inner contacts, and there's these pieces of metal that bend over and go to the outside, and that's what solders to the board. So I can tack. If I get my soldering iron down in there and get that tinned up and shove a resistor lead down in there and one over there. I'm going to give that a try. I managed to wedge a 1 meg resistor down into the socket pins, so let's see if that makes any difference. Well, that's a definite improvement. I've never ever had sync immediately on startup with this. Boost is low though. I'm adjusting the control now. I had the hold at one extreme. I'm going to adjust the inner range control. This doesn't seem quite right. You want to have the horizontal hold so you can have it about in the middle of its range when you get a lock. So, let's see if I can tweak this coil a bit. Still have to have it out pretty far, which seems odd, and the voltage is about 100 volts low on the boost. But stable horizontal hold for the first time with this set. So, what do I want to do about it? Well, continue to do more resistance and voltage checks on the other pins. And obviously that's not the greatest solution. And I'm curious about that low boost. I think the next thing I'll try doing is just tacking a replacement in lieu of this. It's been staying cool, so I don't think it's really an issue. But it's an easy thing to do. That's the original cap in here. That's the filter on the boost. The boost is low. The boost is derived from the flyback. And if the flyback, there was an issue with the power going to it, not enough drive or something, I don't think I would have full width and a halfway decent picture. And then I've switched back to the old original picture tube. It's very weak. And this is actually halfway watchable as it is, and so I really don't think there's any issue with the flyback of the high voltage, and that's what the boost is derived from. So it does seem a little odd, but anyways, so don't really want to leave a resistor hanging out there like that. So I will spot check around it. I'm also wondering. I took some photos of these networks as I was making them, and some video footage. I want to go back and look at that and see if I can spot my mistake. Because that's a pretty simple thing. Going to that pin on that cup plate, I think the only thing that's there... actually, okay, there's two things there. I mean, I suppose I could have forgotten to put that 1 meg resistor in entirely, or didn't solder it. I don't know. But tacking that one externally seems to have fixed the hold issue. So it seems unlikely that there'd be any other errors inside the network, otherwise it wouldn't be working as well as it is. I don't know. But if I want to do a nice neat job, I will eventually have to pull the board out, and maybe there's a bad solder connection underneath this network, or just replace the network entirely. Here's a peek back underneath the chassis. This is that 3-section capacitor. So here is the 220 cathode bypass cap I first tacked in to replace it. And now I've tacked in a 10 microfarad for the boost and a 22 microfarad on the low B+ supply. And I also went ahead and replaced the filament thermistor. This big guy here. Because these have a real high failure rate, and the cold resistance on this I'm measuring well over 600 ohms, and it's supposed to be 400, and I think that's why this set's taking so long to warm up. So I took 2 of the modern 220s and put them in series to form 440 cold, and the hot temperature should be around 8 ohms. So we'll see how that works out, and I think that's it for underneath the chassis. So I'll flip this back over, hook everything back up, and again monitor that boost voltage and see if we can get closer to 400. Here goes another power up test. Monitoring the boost voltage again. Well, it's nice to have the set come up with the picture synchronized for a change. And hey, look at that boost voltage. It's 9 volts low, 8 volts low. Alright. So in spite of this cap seeming to test okay on my capacitance bridge, apparently not good enough for this boost circuit. Now that filters power coming off of the flyback. So I imagine it's got some 15.75 kilohertz ripple to it, whereas that solar capacitor analyzer I believe is using DC when it's checking for leakage. So maybe at the higher frequency there's more leakage. I don't know, but definitely we got about 100 plus more volts with that new cap in place. So, things are looking pretty good. Although the picture actually doesn't look so good. Now, partly I know this picture tube's a little weak, but there's a lot of noise in the picture.
This will fall this year. Last year it was
Adjusting the fine tuning right now. So the set might benefit from an alignment. But something else I haven't taken a look at is what's inside here. I know in other predictors I've worked on, I found a lot of out-of-spec resistors inside here. So that's worth taking a look at. Just going to take out a few screws and pop this cover off. Luckily, I was able to scrape away the coating on that network and find that indeed I had failed to connect pin 6 to anything. So I scraped through the paint and the epoxy, tacked a little jumper wire on there, and got the set working fine. So I'll just slap a little more primer over that at some point, and everything will be cool. So now, got the core down in the coil like it was before I touched it. The range control is not pegged over to one end. Horizontal hold. I can adjust it quite a bit and I don't lose sync. So, working fine. So, just a few things. Oh, and I popped the cover off the IF. And, really there aren't any resistors that are that far out, so I'm inclined to leave it alone. Picture doesn't look so hot, but again, old picture tube. Until I either replace this picture tube or get the other head unit to get the cable spliced back together, I'm not gonna worry about doing an alignment or anything like that. So I want to remove my temporary diodes, put the originals back down, and get this guy out and restuff it.
Children were slain. You like that song, huh, Tommy?
Yeah, I like it. But I hate that yellow John Thurman. Why don't you make up another one, Lucas? Not about any old yellow coward. Make up one about a hero.
Well, now, you wouldn't want me to be making up a song about your daddy, would you?
Sure. He's a hero, isn't he?